Awesome.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. I'm Aaron Hamilton. You've been listening to Neil and I catch up on our barbecue exploits. I'm Aaron Hamilton. I'm the chair of IdentityNORTH, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to this IdentityNORTH webinar. Our topic today is consumer-centric design for digital identity, and we received a huge response to the webinar when we posted the topic on identitynorth.ca. Part of that excitement is from the topic, and part of it is probably just from the caliber of our speaker today. Neil is an exceptional leader in digital innovation. And just before I go through to introduce him, let me just say, our mandate here at IdentityNORTH is to educate, to connect, and to showcase innovative leaders. This is a great example of innovation in the digital identity space. The webinar is going to run for about half an hour, followed by a 10-minute Q&A session. Neil's going to be sharing his PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to collect any questions that you submit as we go along. So I'll help field those questions and get us going. At the end of the presentation, I'll moderate that Q&A session, and we'll get through as many of the questions as we can. So feel free to use the conference tool to submit those questions as we go. And with that, let me introduce Neil Butters, the Director of Payment Technology at Interac. Over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate being on this, this webinar. I'm a member of the innovation team at Interac. The Interac Innovation Group looks at emergent technologies and capabilities that could be disruptive or advantageous to Interac's 3 to 5 year roadmap. I'd like to thank Aaron and the team at IdentityNORTH for allowing us to bring you this webinar and on consumer-centric design thinking and how it relates to digital identity solutions. I'd like everybody to think about the day that they went to get their beginner's permit or their driver's license. Getting your driver's license used to be a coming of age event. I remember the process of getting my learner's permit, which allowed me to drive a car with supervision from a licensed driver. My dad taking me to the government office where I waited with others my age to write the test. And then eventually for my actual license, the road test, and the ugly photo that we all had to live with for the next 5 years. But the sole purpose of the driver's license was not only to take my parents' car for a spin, it was the key that was needed to open my bank account and get a passport and board a plane all on my own. We also used to use it for, getting access to alcohol and local bars and clubs. Although the number of teens driving has decreased over the years, the driver's license is still a critical piece of documentation for providing who we are. As we dive into helping solve the digital identities ecosystem in Canada with both the public and private sector, for it to be successful, we should not overlook the consumer. And that's you, me, and every other Canadian. The focus of this webinar is to look at how we can apply consumer-centric design to helping ensure success and scale of the digital ID framework in Canada. So what is consumer-centric design and why is it important to digital ID? Consumer-centric design is an approach or a process of building a product or service based on the consumer's wants, needs, and challenges. There are 2 key criteria for consumer-centric design. The first, having a good understanding of the voice of the customer. And the second, being able to combine the voice of the customer with designing a great user experience. At Interac, we apply consumer-centric design to our product evolution process. With a strong history of launching secure and ubiquitous digital payment solutions, we believe it's integral to always put your customer first. And by truly putting your customer first, it enables you to design for the real problems that they'll face with your product or service. So how would this work in helping to design and introduce digital ID services to ensure maximum uptake and scale? let's break down the two key criteria for consumer-centric design as it relates to digital ID. So number one, having a good understanding of the voice of the customer. By capturing the voice of the customer, it helps you to understand their needs and their requirements, not just in the product itself, but also at all stages of the customer journey, which includes the upstream and downstream touch points that affect how your product or service is bought or used. Some of the methods to capture the voice of the customer for digital ID would be via consumer interviews, surveys, focus groups, and also through existing data like social media and current digital behaviors. In the area of digital ID, a lot is still very new. Since digital ID really doesn't exist in Canada, we can capture the voice of the customer and what we do know. Existing domestic services as well as similar services. We can look at existing consumer behaviors, for example, existing government requirements and processes. We can also look internationally and what other jurisdictions have done. Look at adoption or lack thereof, how the fraudsters and the criminals have responded. Invariably, you will find some do's and some don'ts. All of this information will likely get you to a good foundation. When moving to a digital product or service, it is also good to know the technology behaviors, how your consumer how your consumer uses the technology today, for what, and what they like about it or don't like about it. So let's take a moment and take a closer look at how Canadians use technology, particularly the mobile device. Canadians love their smartphones. 76% of Canadians own a smartphone. They're reliant on the device, and it has changed the way we interact with each other and the companies we decide to buy from. Think of your own experiences or the experiences of your kids. And how do Canadians perceive technology? 77% believe that it helps them communicate with other people, while 66% believe it saves them time. But what are Canadians doing on their smartphone? According to ComScore, Canadian consumers spent 2 hours and 54 minutes on their smartphone per day, and that's over and above the digital time that we spend on laptops and playing on our game consoles. From a mobile payments perspective, we are seeing a significant growth in the comfort of accessing money on mobile devices. We see this with the popularity of Interac e-transfer. Canadians sent $92 billion worth of e-transfers last year, of which more than 75% were received on a mobile device. We're also seeing year-over-year growth with adding Interac debit products to a mobile wallet and using them in store. The RFI Research's recent Canada Payments Council report, which looks at how Canadians bank and pay, they stated that usage of mobile payments is growing, with more than 1 in 5 Canadians having now made a mobile payment. Let's take a bit of time now to deep dive into retail sales as it relates to E&M commerce. Retail commerce sales in Canada is forecast to reach $56.96 billion in 2018, a 26.3% jump from 2017, and account for 9% of total retail sales. By 2021, 13.7% of all retail sales in Canada will be transacted via e-commerce channels. eMarketer estimates that 60.9% of the population in Canada made at least one purchase via a digital channel last year. For younger millennials, ages 18 to 24, the penetration rate was 75%, well above the total average as it was for residents ages 35 to 44. The share of mobile-based online buying continues to grow in Canada. eMarketer expects mobile commerce to account for 30% of retail's e-commerce and 2.6% of total retail sales in the country this year. And I know I spent quite a bit of time discussing consumer technology, payments habits, as well as E&M commerce, but these insights are good to know as you get closer to the voice of the customer, building a foundation as we dig deeper with methods like consumer surveys and feedback. The second criteria for consumer-centric design is being able to combine the voice of the customer with designing a great user experience. Once you have a solid foundation on the voice of the customer, you should leverage that in your design process. At Interac, a big part of our product evolution process is applying the framework called design thinking. Design thinking is an approach to get to the core of the gap between what the product is and what the consumer wants, expects, feels from the product or service. At Interac, design thinking has been key to building our trusted brand, understanding the importance of consumer control and convenience, as well as the need for ubiquity. These are also core in our key guiding principles as we approach helping drive digital ID in Canada. So let's take a look at the first, a trusted brand. When it comes to payments, it is critical that the consumer trusts the brand that they are using to make the payment. Trust is equally important for the business accepting the payment, but really, what is trust? The University of Victoria release their Gustafson Brand Trust Index every year, and the model is based on the following. Brand trust, which is consumer perceptions of whether the brand is trustworthy and acts with integrity. Values-based trust, which is consumer perceptions on the brand's social responsibility. Functional trust, which is consumers' perception on how well the brand's product performs or functions. Relationship trust, which is consumers' perception on how the brand interacts with its consumers. And word of mouth, which is whether consumers recommend the brand to others. I'm proud to say that this index ranked Interac the #1 most trusted financial brand in Canada. Trust is foundational to how we build and design products. Understanding that we are helping Canadians pay with their own money. Our products need to be secure, reliable, and easy to use. If you think of e-transfer, it just works. If you're sending money to anyone with an email address or a mobile device and a bank account in Canada, you just trust that it works. The second criteria is user control and convenience. Users must feel fully confident that their personal information is their own property, and any information obtained must be used only for the specified purpose. Users should know that they're always in control of the process while they are using the product or service. If you don't meet this criteria, they won't continue to use your service. There have been some high-profile stories regarding data breaches and data sharing without consent or knowledge, especially with some high-profile social media platforms. As examples, you need only look no further. The solution must have a simple, convenient user experience, but balanced with privacy and security. I can't stress this point enough. When you think of a convenient user experience, it's key that the benchmark should be the existing process. Anything designed should be easier than the benchmark already set. it's also critical to design security with convenience as one of its core attributes. In our experience working with financial services, providing secure digital payments, we have a good understanding that a thoughtfully designed system can both be highly secure and more than convenient enough for high velocity transactions. As an example of this, Interac debit on Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Samsung Pay, users feel fully confident that when they add and use their debit card in one of these mobile wallets, their critical information is tokenized so that actual financial information is not on the mobile device and is not used while interacting with the merchant, and therefore not available to be stored in merchants' databases. And the third is ubiquity. Consistent access to products, services, transactions, and agreements is key to convenience and trust. A big part of the success of Interac is that it's provided by almost every bank and accepted at almost every merchant in Canada. When you pay, especially for those everyday purchases, you should be able to rely on the product and pay when, where, and how you want to. So when we think of about digital ID, it's both deeply personal and foundational to important matters like wealth and access to services. Widespread adoption by individuals and even organizations will depend on the technical capabilities of a particular product or service, but also, and likely even more so, on the general level of the trust a solutions provider has been granted. It is critical that when looking at providing a digital ID solution, it is with technology and processes, including physical ones, that they already trust, use, and that work. When applying design thinking, it's key to understanding how people feel when handling a critical document like a passport or a driver's license. How do they want to apply, submit, as well as collect such documents? What is just as important is how to guarantee how they feel and that they feel secure while applying for the document. Do you feel safe applying for it online, or do you want to do it in person? With design thinking, you can unlock the actual problems that exist, in many cases leverage existing technologies and solutions to help solve the problem at hand. Not every problem requires us to reinvent the wheel. By having a good understanding of the voice of the customer, their needs, their wants, their problems and issues, and by designing experience based on that voice, it will be easier and you will have a better chance of success of having the product adopted and shared. So thank you for joining me today, and thanks to our friends at IdentityNORTH for having me as a guest on this webinar. If you have any interest in learning our work on digital ID, you can visit our developer center at developer.interac.ca. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil. That's really, really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about, and I encourage everyone that has questions to please use the Q&A button that's at the bottom of the screen there to submit them. I have a couple of questions that I have, and I'll just start with those. Neil, I was noticing that Interac has put a lot of time and energy into helping people think about responsible spending as in this time of year with the holidays, and people have a tendency to maybe go a little further than they want to. And it strikes me that this is kind of education opportunity that identity and the various attributes that we have, or how we share that, that Interac could kind of apply back to identity. You know, if you think about the new tagline there for Interac of own your world, it would seem that there would be kind of an equivalent opportunity for, owning your identity, or, controlling your world. Have you guys given any thought to that, and where that's going to go and how design thinking kind of plays into that?
Yeah, so one of the key constructs, and I said it earlier in the presentation, is people, consumers need to own their identity information, and through various services like security through abstraction, that information can be concealed until it needs to be released. So that's kind of the premise that we've always operated under, is being able to tokenize. So for instance, when you pick up an e-transfer, that link is a single-use token that allows you to accept the money. Similarly with our Apple Pay or Samsung Pay or Google Pay solutions, those tokens that are deposited into your mobile phone generate a single-use token when you tap it at a merchant's terminal. So privacy is the utmost of importance. And being able to provide these capabilities like zero knowledge proofs.
You just cut out there for me a little bit, Neil. I heard you said privacy.
Yeah, privacy. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Oh, I hear you now.
You there?
Yep.
Okay. So, being able to provide capabilities that enable things like zero knowledge proofs that conceal this information puts the user in control of their information, their vital information. So,
but when you get into talking about things like zero knowledge proofs and things like that, obviously that's something that consumers just can't get their heads around. We can't expect them to. So has there been any thinking has there been any thinking around how to productize this down for the consumer?
So the beauty of Interac is we hide all the complexity.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea that all of the complexity happens in the background, and we give you a zero knowledge proof. A zero knowledge proof actually is your debit card, and it's that token that sits in your Apple Pay wallet, and it's also the link that is used in eTransfer. So if you apply those same types of capabilities and technologies to identity. Identity and payments, are like, peanut butter and jam. You can't really separate them, and you do exactly the same thing what you do for a payment as you would for identity, right? So, that's where the value of Interac comes, is we hide all of that complexity and give you a tool that allows you to do what you need to do while hiding, protecting your privacy with the utmost security.
So what kind of products do you think that we can expect to see coming in the next while from Interac that will be kind of customer facing, that will allow me to do these things?
So I think, what you can expect to see is, we'll continue to leverage our existing capabilities, leverage our existing relationships with government, leverage our existing relationships with financial institutions to be able to provide end-to-end digital user experiences that, because we're in a physical identity world today, we can't get to the digital aspects of where we need to go. So, when you think of, having transaction limits, which are always a bother. Flash, for instance, has, $100 limit for the tap before you need to authenticate. The reason why those limits exist is because there's risk. And that risk is because we're not, all of us, the merchants, the financial institutions, and everybody who's transacting, they're not completely confident that it's not a fraudster, right? So this notion of getting closer to the actual identity of an individual using abstraction capabilities allows for the potential for those limits to be moved up so that businesses can transact in a more reasonable manner.
Timelines and actual kind of scenarios or use cases, like could you go us through an experience and when you think we might be able to actually do this?
So, we're working hard. It's, and we're working through, our existing contacts with government. When government is ready to move, and when the financial institutions are ready to consume those capabilities, then that's when, you'll see product.
And presumably, we'd be looking at a change to terminals and types. Can we walk through what that experience might be? Are we going to require a new terminal?
No, there may be opportunities to leverage the existing terminal footprint, particularly with the LCBO. You want that one-tap experience. So that's one.
That's a really interesting one, because they already have higher limits, right? But that is a situation where the retailer has taken on a risk to raise the limits, right?
Yeah, so that's a merchant risk, but that's typically on the credit side. The liability model in Canada for debit is with the issuer. So to the extent that the issuer is comfortable in raising those limits is when they will do so.
Oh, so the LCBO, because there's a higher tap at the LCBO than there is at most stores, is there not?
That could very well be. I'm not the expert in that anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that feeds right into one of the questions that we had in the chat. It was around talking about how do we apply risk analysis to the services that you rolled out there at Interac, and I think this is an interesting question. Do you want to try to field that one? Yeah.
So we do risk analysis in a number of different ways. So at the card level, we do kind of risk analysis at there. We do risk analysis as a consortium on behalf of all of the financial institutions. So it's not that we're tracking anybody. It's everything, because everything's abstracted. We don't know who you are, but what we're doing is we're analyzing behavioral types, so that when something is not right, we flag the issuer for them to to follow up on, so to speak. So we'll likely continue to do that. We use data for the benefit of the system. We don't use it to ever try to track anybody or anything like that. It's more around making sure that we're doing the system justice and making sure that Canadians feel safe in transacting on our rails.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Okay, that's really interesting. Do we want to go? I want to build on that back again, because the interesting questions are, especially as we get into, being able to order cannabis online, and where we're seeing that the delivery. You start to see applications of this, of closing the loop of the transaction with handheld terminals at the point of delivery, or in-store terminals, point of sale terminals at a store, just like the LCBO. And I think I'm less concerned in that situation about fraud, although of course the retailers are, as much as I am concerned about the age of the person purchasing. Do you have a sense of how we would obfuscate some of that information? Because I don't need the LCBO to actually receive information about my date of birth or my age, as much as I need to have them comfortable that I am of legal age to purchase the product. Do you see that as being part of the scenario? Because I know you talked about the overall structure, and when I look about user-centric design, that's kind of my thinking.
Yeah, so there's no reason why you need to send your birth date at all to the LCBO or the cannabis store. There are ways through abstraction that that you can provide the age of consent, or the age that you're allowed to transact in other ways. So that's one of the areas that we're looking at. The aspects of credential management and being able to provide those mechanisms so that you're not sharing personal details and you're only sharing them in an abstracted or a need-to-know manner.
So let's just talk right. When you go to the Ontario Cannabis Store website, which I've checked out for research purposes, the first thing it asks you to put in your date of birth. Now, it's kind of a bit of a farce because anyone could put in any date, and I don't really feel like giving the Ontario Cannabis Store my real date of birth. So I just make sure it's something in the 70s, and so you get through no problem. That seems to be a bit of a farce, and maybe something that could be improved upon. But I don't see the Ontario Cannabis Store wanting to put up something where I'm going to have to, to tap a card necessarily against my computer, against my phone. What kind of scenarios might we be able to facilitate here?
Yeah, so just on the first point, the reason why the cannabis store and the LCBO are making you go through that process of submitting your birth date, is because they have no other means, right? And what they'll do, especially with a cannabis store, is that, when that product gets delivered to your house, then Canada Post will look for your driver's license or whatever. But we believe that if you digitize those documents that Canada Post would be using in that realm and provide an online mechanism so that your date of birth or your age, the age requirement of the user can be checked online in a secure manner, then that's the way to go. That way everybody feels safe, and you provide the necessary level of trust and the necessary level of due diligence for the cannabis store.
So it strikes me though, like right now, they're asking me to make a declaration of my date of birth, and I can put in anything as long as it's 19 plus. That it would be you could be doing a better job than that using information that you have at the banks or access to banking information, which isn't the same as a provincial birth certificate or a driver's license, but it's still better than it's still pretty good, right?
It's pretty good, but what we believe is that getting back to the authoritative source and then using the authoritative source to tokenize credentials that you could be using for everyday use is probably the better way to go.
It's better, but realistically, if we want to get started today, like doesn't have that information available today, but the banks do. Mm-hmm. And you already have the pipes into the banks.
We do.
And it would be better than me declaring my date of birth.
Oh, totally.
I'm just wondering if there's a shorter version, like we'll bring the governments on when they're ready, but in the meantime, we can move ahead without them if they're not gonna keep going. Which actually feeds into the question that another attendee has written and said, how can Interac work with the new provincial IDs that are coming out in various provinces, and what can we expect to be different in those provinces than in the provinces that aren't going to have a version of a digital provincial ID?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Basically, what they're saying is are the new digitally kind of enabled provincial IDs going to come on pretty quickly, and how will that allow you to do more things? It kind of dovetails with my earlier question, which is, I was asking, do we wait for the banks or do we just keep going? And this person is asking, well, what could you do if the governments were, have their credentials ready to go?
Yeah, so I think that, provinces typically are the authoritative source for birth, right? And if there was, if they could attest to the individual, then there are definitely ways that we could tokenize an identity and actually allow you to, for instance, get your digital driver's license while you're at, for instance, Service Ontario immediately, as opposed to getting the getting a temporary and then having it followed up through the mail. So you may be aware that there's some work going on with AMVA in the US around digital driver's licenses, and one of the key constructs is, of those pilots is using verifiable claims. And, you know, to a large extent, you know, with some tweaking, that's what our token service provider actually does, is provides those cryptographic proof that the credential is solid. And if you embed information in a secure way about the individual, i.e. their birth date, then that can be checked through a number of different sources. So I see that there's synergies in what we're doing as it relates to what the provinces are doing. And what we're trying to do is to enable that the banks can actually consume in a digital way the government identity information also in a digital way, so that what you're doing is you're providing connected tissue between all of the documents that you carry around in your wallet, but in a digital fashion.
Very interesting. So, I mean, that's kind of getting to a question that Narch asked, which was around the ability for you to provide a service around validation of birth certificate, that's kind of what the scenario that you're talking about down in the States.
Yeah, well, I mean, the states, the authoritative sources for birth are in not very good shape. So, but yes, there are definitely opportunities to work with vital statistics, and when that driver's license is, because you use your birth certificate in order to get a driver's license, and then you use the combination of those two in order to get a bank account. If you can digitize that entire process and provide connected tissue and a forensic layer, so that when something goes awry, then that's a much better system than the physical one that we find ourselves in today.
Very interesting. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions together here. And one, can you talk about some of the technologies that you're using, blockchain or distributed ledger technology is all the shizzle these days, and people are talking about, how exciting it is. Can you talk a little bit about how you might be employing some of those technologies and others that you're really, hot to trot on? And also some of the partnerships that you're working with and who those might be.
Yeah, so, on the first question, we're firm believers that blockchain is, a revolutionary technology. There's no question about it. The challenge that blockchain that, I believe personally is that it's new, it's unproven. There's standards that are being worked on, but it's not mature enough. It kind of takes me back to my days in the smart card world. Smart cards were looking for a problem to solve, great technology, but really didn't have a business case to solve problems until, financial fraud got to a point where it was actually a requirement to actually move to that kind of a technology. I see blockchain as kind of a similar, in a similar situation. But having said that, when when you have a blockchain employed, you have to protect the private key, and there's no better way to protect that private key than in a secure enclave in the hands of a user, right? So mobile wallet and mobile credentialing capability is an analogous, or is adjacent technology that when blockchain has its coming of age moment, that we can likely just plug right in. So, on that point, I think what we're doing is we have technology that's available today that can be applied to some of these, use cases that will help government get to a point where they can start digitizing some of their physical documents. But when blockchain is ready, then we'll work to endeavor on how that actually plugs in.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense to look and see, wait and see, but experiment as you go. But can
exactly.
we talk about some, I mean, you guys are ubiquitous through Canada as we've talked about. So let's talk a little bit about some of the partnerships, because you obviously have to be able to work with a lot of different technology partners. Who are you working with right now on some of the identity projects?
So what I can tell you that's public is we do have a partnership with 2 keys on the OCE, the Ontario Centers of Excellence challenge. So we are working with them. We are working with others that obviously this is a heavily NDA'd area, but
So you can break those and just tell us who you're working with.
But yeah, exactly. But obviously, financial institutions, we won't do anything without the understanding and having the best intentions for the financial institutions. That's why we exist, is to help them. We also we think that a strong partnership with government and helping them being able to digitize their foundational and supporting pieces of identity is the way to go, and you can really turn on some really exciting use cases if you have if you're helping both the financial institutions and the government realize end-to-end user experience for the benefit of Canadians.
Okay. Any other partners that you want to talk about, or any other projects you want to talk about before we?
No, actually, I'd love to go on and on, but
yeah, that's fair. Absolutely fair. So let's. I want to just go back for 2 seconds to talk a little bit about other technologies that you are flagging that you think are either Canadian or international that that you think are things that need to be watched and opportunities for Canada to excel in.
So there's a big play here for biometrics. I myself have been working in biometrics for the better part of 20 years, on and off over the course of my career. Blockchain is another one that we're watching. Distributed ledger technology is, it will meet its coming today or coming of age at some point in the future. We just don't know when. And there's some really interesting capabilities that we currently already have employed in our mobile wallets that I think can really turn on some interesting use cases that help not only end users but the financial institutions and the governments, and that's tokenization technology.
Yeah, very good. Well. I'll turn it back over to you if there's anything that you think that we didn't cover off very well, but I feel like we've done a great job. I'm looking forward to seeing you at some of the upcoming events that we have over the course of the year and into 2019. But other things that maybe we didn't cover off, Neil, that we should have done a better job at?
No, I think you did an awesome job, Aaron.
Well, listen, thanks again, Neil. This has been really great. Thank you all for joining us. This is the third in our series, but we have a few more coming up. We're a few months away from the IdentityNORTH Western Workshop in Vancouver that's taking place January 22nd and 23rd. And we're also pleased to announce that the annual summit in Toronto will be held at Mars on June 4th and 5th. So you can visit the website identitynorth.ca to get your tickets. I know a number of you already took advantage of that Black Friday, Cyber Monday event that we had over the weekend. So I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you there. And those of you that didn't, we still have the early bird tickets up, actually the super early bird tickets. They're just going up now for Toronto. So we hope to see you there. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again, Neil. It was very, very, really a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody.